Well, hello, this is Electronic Wizard again. Welcome back to my channel. Um, and as I said in previous videos, I'm claiming that uh, I met this guy. This is the book of Genesis. And back in 1983, in the middle of July, I was taken out of my body. This was not a near-death experience. I was not unconscious in any way, shape, or form. And I was not dreaming. Your brain knows when you've been dreaming or not. I was not on any drugs. I was not knocked over the head. I just got back home from school. It was a half an hour after I got home from school, and all of a sudden there I was taken out of my body. And I won't go into too many details at this point in time because it's rather personal, although I'm not really averse to going into detail, but I know the process by which I needed to take to get there. It was something that I had to do on my own. And perhaps if you keep listening and keep watching my videos, perhaps you'll learn, if you will, the trick. I hate using that word. It's not a trick. Okay, but I had this experience, and he was on my left side, about right here, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and I didn't actually turn around to see because I instantaneously knew who it was. And he put his right hand on my right shoulder, in a sense, said, or not in a sense, I'm paraphrasing here. He said, "Let's get going. I got some things to show you, Dave." And he proceeded to give me a tour of heaven. And when it was all done, he put me back into my body. And so I've kind of been dealing with it ever since. And I became fascinated by, in particular, this book right here. Now, yes, at the time, I was a Christian, if you had asked me. If at the time before this happened, the day before this happened, if you said to me, if you came up to me, "Are you a Christian? Do you believe there's a God?" I would have said yes to both questions. However, I've also would have said I'm struggling, and what my struggle has always been is the idea, the premise that the fingerprints of God are all over the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But on the other hand, I'm not religious. How does a non-religious person tell somebody that they were just taken out of their body and taken to heaven? That's somewhat of a dilemma. So anyway, this little video is going to be about the very beginnings of the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. And if you read the various versions of the book of Genesis, whether it's the Jewish version, they all pretty much say the same thing. In the beginning, God, or God in the beginning, or in beginning, God, or God in beginning. But they all convey the same basic idea and concept that there was a beginning point and somebody caused that beginning point. In this particular case, this person right here is claiming to have started that beginning process. So that's our premise. That's where I'm starting out at, and that's the basis for this video. When you were either in junior high school or elementary school, somebody at some point in time told you about this idea, what's called infinite regression. And infinite regression is the idea of, imagine you had a string and you cut that string in half, and then you cut that in half and that in half, so on and so forth. Or imagine you had a line and you cut that line in half. The question is how far can you keep going with that? Well, indefinitely. Thus the term infinite regression. And infinite regression is the sort of the premise or the concept or the idea or the process by which has pushed and forwarded and propelled scientific inquiry since man first began to walk upright, if you will. The idea that if once man discovers something, let's say like the atom, the next thing he wants to know is, well, what's inside that? And so, by the way, atom, the A is in the Greek form means not. So, and Thomas or Toma or Tom, atom means to cut. So you're not able to cut it any further. That's it. So it's rather ironic that the very word atom, when it was named, was sort of a contradiction in terms, because no sooner did man discover the atom than all of a sudden um, the question was asked by some, well, what's inside the atom? And then what's inside that, and so on and so forth. And so back uh, in the 1800s, an English chemist, John Dalton, performed experiments with various chemicals that showed that matter indeed seemed to consist of elementary lumpy particles. Although he did not know about their structure, he knew that the evidence pointed to something fundamental. So we have our first individual who made this inquiry, John Dalton, and from there you jump to 1900. Max Planck, professor of theoretical physics at Berlin, showed that when you vibrate atoms strong enough, such as when you heat an object until it glows, you can measure the energy only in discrete units. He called these energy packets quanta. So you have this other individual who got involved, and so on and so forth. And so, Rutherford knew that atoms consist of a compact, positively charged nucleus around which circulate negative electrons at a relatively large distance. And so now you jumped ahead to 1919, where Rutherford finally identified the particle nucleus as discrete positive charges of matter. So that was 1919, and so on and so forth. And so then, once it was discovered that atoms contain subatomic particles, then the question is what's inside that? Quantums, um, gluons, and quarks, and then the boson particle, and so on and so forth, and then ultimately the God particle. It's not called the God particle because they're looking for God, but it was a terse saying early on that this thing is so goddamn hard to find we can't seem to locate it. That's not a very nice thing to say, is it? So they got, as the saying goes, or as you read in some articles, they did away with the thing is so goddamn hard to find that they just started calling it the God particle. Let's not call it. Let's just say it's something nice. Let's say it in a nice way. After all, we want to get people on our side. We want to get people to, help fund this so-called Hadron Collider. This is CERN. And so you have this idea of infinite regression, which has pushed scientific inquiry to the point to where we have it now. Okay. Then all of a sudden, at one point in time, this guy came along. And this is Georges Lemaitre, the father of the Big Bang. And as it says here, according to the Big Bang Theory, the expansion of the universe began with the explosion. Now that right there, that's a misnomer. It's not an explosion. That conveys the wrong message. It conveys the wrong idea. It was a quantum flux, and it occurred at a singularity. And so this Big Bang, as he says, the explosion as a single particle at a definite point in time. This startling idea first appeared in scientific form in 1931. And then you jump to here, and by 1930, other cosmologists, including Eddington, Sitter, Einstein, had concluded that the static models of the universe that they had worked on for many years were unsatisfactory. Furthermore, Hubble, using the world's largest telescope at Wilson in California, shown that distant galaxies all appear to be receding from us at a speed proportional to their distance. And it was at this point that Lemaitre drew Eddington's attention to this work early on, in which he had delivered and explained the relation between the distance and the recession velocities of the galaxy. Well, Eddington at once called the attention of the cosmologists to Lemaitre's 1927 paper and arranged for the publication of an English translation together with Hubble's observation. Lemaitre paper convinced the majority of astronomers that the universe was indeed expanding. Well, if something is expanding like a balloon, then that means you can rewind that and go back to sort of, if you will, a beginning point. Well, this sets up a conflict. How can you have, on the one hand, infinite regression and then all of a sudden now you have a beginning point to something. So that doesn't square. They're at odds with each other. You can't have, and of course the scientists knew this, there was a problem with that. You can't have infinite regression on the one hand and a beginning to the universe on the other. So how do you get around that? Well, here's how they got around it, through the multiverse theory. But here's what the whole point of this video is to point out a rather interesting something that happens when every time scientists come forward with something, they end up stepping on their toes. They step all over themselves. Because they came out with this idea that the multiverse contains 10 to the 150 individual and distinct multiverses. Bear in mind that 10, now keep this in mind, and you've seen this on my previous video, 10 to the 80th represents the number of atoms in the known universe. This represents the number of atoms in the known universe. 10 to the 80th. So you can see that if 10 to the 80th represents all the atoms in the known universe, that's a rather large number. So you can't even imagine what 10 to the 150th represents. Okay. But whatever you say about these numbers, that they're beyond our mind to comprehend, whatever you say, one thing is for sure. And that both these numbers, okay, both of them are finite, what we call finite. They're both finite. They're not infinite. In other words, even the multiverse theory doesn't explain how it is that you can have a beginning point. Because as large as this number is, there's a beginning here. So now, scientists are now coming around to this idea that there must be some beginning point to everything. Of course, they use terms like prime, primitive, or primal cause, that which is behind all that. But the important thing is, they're saying that there is a beginning to everything. Whether it's infinite regression, or whether it's expansion, or whether it's, the Big Bang, if you will. Even the Big Bang, by the way, nobody really likes that term because it conveys the wrong kind of idea that there was this explosion. It was a quantum flux at a singularity. So the explosions, Big Bangs, it doesn't really do that term justice. I get their point. I see that. But you would think that the Big Bang would kind of coincide within the beginning, right? So that you can't have that. So that's why they pushed it back to a multiverse. But again, the multiverse has a beginning point because 10 to the 50th is finite. So you have to have a beginning point. So at some point in time, the physicists are going to get together and say, people, look, we got to have a beginning. There must be a beginning. Well, the Bible has said it first, 3,500 years ago, in the beginning. So this is Electronic Wizard. If you like these videos, please subscribe. If you want to leave a comment, go ahead and leave a comment. I don't have any problems with the comment. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching and listening.
Then a stranger came to town. Tell me he's a straight shooter, young. That shot around, and he's coming for you. Yes, he's gonna shoot you down. He's on your left, he's on your right. Better look around. Will he shoot you from behind? What bring you light? See Gabriel at the gate, and Michael at his right. They say he's coming for you.